Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, and today I have with me Duane Girard. Thank you for joining us, Duane.
Thanks for having me, Dave. It's nice to talk to you again.
Cool. So the reason why I'm so excited about this talk or this conversation or this podcast today is Duane learned a lot about teams as a sergeant in the U.S. Army, and in the military. You know, he actually learned a lot about agility, which he then, when he came into civilian life, went through some training and some word stuff and some application stuff, and then actually started to use these skills as a professional Scrum Master out in the real world. So I'm really excited to hear your journey, Duane, and maybe there's some things we can learn along the way. So I guess to start off with, you know, tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah. I currently work as a Scrum Master and Agile coach for a large multinational organization. I'm a woodworker and I'm a dad. Been doing Scrum Master work or some analog of the position for about 15 years now across a couple different industries. You mentioned one of them.
Yeah. So tell me, I mean, everybody wants to know the Army. You know, for many of us that haven't served, and by the way, I really appreciate your service. Thank you for helping us have this life that we all live. So thank you for that. But for the people that haven't served, it sounds like a big change from being a sergeant in the U.S. Army to being a Scrum Master Agile coach. You know, can you talk me through that sort of evolution, that learning arc, as it were?
Yeah, it's no problem. Let's see. So I joined the Army in about 2006, and between multiple different deployments as both a soldier and a defense contractor, I had the opportunity to build, foster, and coach teams in environments that were frequently more kinetic than usual. So I had to focus on teaching and enabling my team members to resolve problems quickly and independently, instead of waiting on me to do it for them, because quite often time was of the essence. And I eventually stumbled into being a QA engineer, had the opportunity to watch my Scrum Master and realized, hey, I did that job before. And it was really just a lexicology issue. We used different words, but we approached things in the same lightweight and fast response kind of manner.
Yeah, so interestingly, it said so many things that I'd like to explore a little bit. So I've always thought that, well, I guess I don't think that now because I've read enough books, but back in the day before I even started thinking about this, that armies are very hierarchical and are very command and control. But what you just said when you were describing your learning, that's not the case, is it? You create a lot of autonomy in your unit and in the group of people that you work with on a regular basis. How does that sort of fit with this vision of command and control in the Army?
In the environments that I worked in, the focus was more on individual squads. We worked in small teams to produce outcomes that were valuable to our leadership, received feedback on it quickly, and then we're able to adapt our approach to things as we move forward. We definitely didn't run in 1 to 4 week sprints, but day to day, we got immediate feedback on what we did in our operations, adapted for the next day, moved forward, and presented it for feedback immediately again the next day. We didn't call them sprint planning or retrospective or the daily scrum, but we did have those events.
Yeah, it is super interesting though that and the reason why was because the environment, what you described as kinetic, as fast moving, you knew what the outcome that you were pursuing was, but the actual how you were going to get to that outcome, nobody knew until you started doing stuff, right? Would that be a fair assumption?
That's correct. At the squad level, we definitely trusted the individual skill set to figure out the best way forward and bring the desired outcome to our stakeholders or officers, leadership, senior NCOs, whatever you want to call them.
Mm. And that required, so you trusted and they trusted you, you trusted. There's a large amount of trust then that is fostered in the armed services, I'd assume.
It depends on which part of the armed services you're in, but I was in a highly specialized job, yes.
And that thus trust was necessary. It is always interesting. I recently was working with some Royal Marines, talking to them, and they were like, yeah, trust, checking in, working, making sure that you're there for your comrade, for your partner in crime, as it were, or your squad member is really important. They're also, what they talked about, which I want to see if this has a parallel with your experience, Duane, was the size. It could only work up to a certain size, because if it's hundreds of people, well, then it's a whole different problem, right?
Correct, yeah. Different services are going to use different words, but if you try and organize any sort of exercise at the platoon level and allow no flexibility for planning subordinate to that, you're not going to have a very good result. But when you break it down to the individual squads and you trust your experts and the people in those squads to lead themselves, as long as the outcomes and the way to those outcomes is clear, those people, I mean, they're not trying to let you down. They will go out and, if it's possible, bring you back those outcomes.
So many parallels probably to your life now. So, all right, before we get to talk about that, because I'm sure there's all sorts of interesting parallels and maybe some contradictions in, modern corporate America compared to that environment. But before we get to there, tell me, so, all right, you left the army, you then did some contracting with them, and then you moved into so why did you decide to sort of take some professional Scrum qualifications and learning around professional Scrum? Why did you decide to go down this path? There's many places you could have gone after his career in the US Army.
I'll riff a little on Career Builder here. They used to have an apply all button for their recommended jobs, and I clicked it. I accidentally got interviewed for a QA engineer position, ended up getting the job, and that was my way into technology. It worked out pretty well for me, though. As a QA engineer, I mentioned before, I had the chance to watch my Scrum Master work and realize, hey, I did that before. And I've always been the kind of person who wants to be really good at whatever I'm doing. Maybe I'm not the best, maybe I am, depends on the skill. But as a Scrum Master, it took me 3 attempts at the PSM1 to pass.
Oh.
But as I observed and learned from my Scrum Master, went out, studied the theory, followed the Scrum Master learning path on Scrum.org, that sort of thing, eventually I mastered it. I passed the assessment, and I went out looking for new challenges. As my career advanced, the challenges, the next logical step was the PSM2. Went and met Rich Visotky in Minneapolis for that one. Traveled to Toronto to see David Dane for the PSU, the first one, I believe, in Canada.
Yep.
I've always been the kind of person who goes out and looks for the next step or the next challenge, because not only is it fun to accomplish, it gives me data to bring to a conversation that says, hey, this is why I'm pretty good at what I do. So I actually ended up 2020 taking the PSM3. I mostly took it as a scouting mission to see how difficult it was, because I had a discount code and I thought it'd be fun. It kicked my butt, but it was really educational, because we learn from failure, right? Took me 2 more attempts. I eventually passed it in December last year. But after all of that, after nearly 5 years of effort at getting better at things, studying the theory and practicing with communities of practice, whether at work or Discord or Slack or whatever I could find at the time, you can imagine my excitement when I got that email that said, hey, you passed.
I can. So it is interesting, though, you sort of concentrated not only when we were talking about your career in the Army, but about failure, scars, learning, feedback. I think that's obviously a key part of Scrum, but it's also, you described it as a key part of the education to Scrum as well, the learning. As you tried things, you got feedback, you were like, oh, that's interesting. Again, that doesn't, that doesn't necessarily mash with the sort of macho soldier kind of image. So dealing with adversity and failure is crucial, right? Would you agree?
Absolutely. You can't be brittle if you want to be tough.
Wow, that's actually that's super. Not only a great slogan for a T-shirt, but also a great, but also kind of deep.
I appreciate that. I've always liked to be able to teach people, and I can't do that with basic level anything. I can't. I focus on building my skill set so that I can teach junior Scrum Masters, so that I can teach teams. My specialty, or what I prefer to specialize in, is founding new teams, whether it's one team of software developers or it's a team of teams. That's what I enjoy doing. And I can't do that unless I can quickly establish myself as really good at this. Part of that is, my radio voice, and the other part is, hey guys, I know how to do this. Just trust me for a couple weeks and I will show you.
And you do have a fantastic radio voice as well. I'm feeling a little inadequate on this podcast every moment because I'm like, oh, I wish I sounded quite as good as that. But so obviously, this idea, learning about learning, learning about empiricism, learning about how failure, trying to continuously improve. What else did you learn from this whole journey, this journey of sort of professional Scrum and the application of it, working with Scrum Masters, doing the certs, going to training classes? What other things sort of stand out from this journey?
Well, the PSM3 is really hard.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. Joking aside, I got a lot better as a Scrum Master through all of this. I mean, I started out knowing the parallels and definitely having an aptitude for it because of what I learned in my previous career, but focusing on learning and communicating with other people in this career and in this field, and sorry, focusing on learning from other people in this career and in this field helped me to be more successful building teams, apply Scrum across several different industries, and without actively seeking to learn and understand basic theory and application, I definitely wouldn't have been successful at any of this.
Interesting. So I guess you've gone through the arduous process that is PSM3. So we try not to make it arduous, but it ultimately is, I'm afraid, because it is trying to test that application of the knowledge in context and the nuances around the ideas of Scrum. Because obviously Scrum's very, very simple, but its application is incredibly hard because it's human systems, problems we don't understand, environments that we're not aware of. So you've done that. What's next for your journey, do you think?
I'm pretty new to my current engagement. I'm currently helping establish a team of teams again. That's what I like to do,
Yep.
and I'm really enjoying myself. So I plan to stay here for a few years at least. I'm not certain past that.
In terms of tools and techniques that Scrum has taught you, is there anything that's next on your radar about that? You talked about PSU and Lean UX and those ideas, which you took in Canada at Dave Dame's delivery.
Mm-hmm.
Any other big things on your radar?
That new professional Scrum facilitation course looks interesting. I might try that out.
One thing that we've found as we've helped people on their journey to Scrum Mastery and becoming a
Mm-hmm.
better Scrum Master is that facilitation is a skill that is often undervalued. And obviously the pandemic made it very obvious because you've got 20 people on a Zoom call or a Teams call, and suddenly you're trying to get to an outcome. Everybody's speaking at the same time, nobody's speaking at the same time, etc. So facilitation is a key skill. So I do recommend that class, obviously, because of that. But but I think it's not just our class, but looking at things like liberating structures, visual facilitation, and things around that are definitely something. So I guess if there's a learner currently, maybe following a similar career arc than you, maybe come out of the services, maybe change career, what would you tell them as they're listening to this podcast?
When I started my career as a Scrum Master, I was a little bit budget restrained. So
yeah.
One of the considerations for me was that Scrum.org offers the certification without requiring the major expenditure of the course. The courses are outstanding, but that's not the only means that we have to learn the skill sets. I recommend very frequently the learning paths that are free on the website, and I participate in a couple different communities of practice. Do you mind if I recommend one?
No, go ahead. It's always good to learn. Maybe I don't know it either, which would be great.
It's agilewatercooler.com. That's one of the Discord servers that I'm on, and it's the most active community of practice I've been able to find. For anyone interested in learning or just asking questions about the intended outcomes of Scrum, it's really rewarding whether you join my server or not, to get out there and learn from people we don't work with directly, because otherwise we get stuck in the common paradigms of our coworkers.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message. I think ultimately, I emphasize this to anybody I'm speaking to, particularly for younger people. The network, talk to people in your field, talk to people not in your field, find out how they're working, find out what tools they're using, find out what's useful for them. It can do amazing things. And I think obviously communities of practice, either inside your organization, outside your organization, are a great place to go. The forums on Scrum.org is another. There's some really good, less of a community, but more of a question and answer and discussion. Some of those discussion threads get incredibly interesting, and I always learn things. When I think I know something, I end up learning something along the way. Go on to answer it and end up learning more than I actually give, which is always a good thing, right? Thank you, Duane. That was really, really interesting. And thank you for sharing your journey to professional Scrum and professional Scrum mastery. And it's certainly an interesting one, and I'm sure has a number of parallels with many of our listeners. So thank you for listening, listeners. This is Dave West here on the Scrum.org community podcast. Thank you for your time. That was awesome. Duane, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dave. It was really fun to be here.
Thank you. Thanks for spending the time. And thank you for listening. As you know, the community, Scrum.org community podcast, we talk to a number of different interesting people who are sharing their journeys and sharing their experiences, or we focus on a particular idea, whether it's leadership or empiricism or whatever. So please come back for more, and we'll always be here producing more content to help you get a little bit better at your profession and helping you solve complex problems. Thank you.